The Windsor Suite was not just a meeting room. It was theater, but not the kind with curtains and applause. No, this was a stage for deals written in decimal points and delivered in deadpan. The suite hummed with power, though no one made a sound. 12 CEOs sat around an oval table so polished it reflected the gold cuffs of their shirts. Each executive a continent, a corporation, an empire. Their faces unreadable, their pens motionless but poised like weapons at rest. Above them, a chandelier flickered warm amber light that danced along the crystal water glasses. The temperature was cool but not cold. The air carried that sterile elegance, the kind you feel in private jets and quiet vaults. And beneath it all was tension, the invisible kind. The kind you don't speak of but feel in your chest like a second heartbeat. Each detail had been calculated to perfection. The floral arrangements, neutral and minimalist, no dominant colors that might offend. The catering filtered through 6 different cultural considerations. The seating chart strategically designed to avoid egos clashing. No one sat directly across from a rival. This was Maris Halloway's design. She didn't just walk into this room today. She had built it, from the language interpreters silently waiting behind mirrored glass, to the 2-page pre-read, translated into 5 dialects, to the carbon-neutral gift sets, pre-approved by each legal team. Maris had orchestrated every moment of this day. 15 years of global negotiation had taught her one truth. Deals aren't signed on paper. They're signed in silence. She stood slightly behind her assigned seat, composed, sharp but alert. She could read the air better than anyone in that room. And right now, something was off. The stillness was too still. The silence wasn't the respectful kind. It wasn't anticipation of triumph. It was bated, tense, like the kind of silence just before someone flips a switch. Then she saw it. Damien Cross, standing in the doorway, not smiling but smirking. And for the first time that morning, Maris' breath caught. It happened in less than 10 seconds. But it rewrote the script of Maris Halloway's entire career. Damien Cross stepped forward, his shoes silent on the marble, but his words anything but. "You won't be needed anymore, Maris. Security will escort you out." He said it with a polished smile, the kind that photographs well, and he said it loudly, deliberately, so that everyone in the Windsor Suite, from CEOs to translators, could hear it land like a gunshot wrapped in velvet. For a heartbeat, the room didn't react, because it couldn't, because this wasn't just unexpected, it was surgical. It was staged. Maris didn't move, not right away. Her eyes flicked not to Damien but to the table, to her chair, where moments ago her leather folio had rested. Now in its place sat his. He hadn't just removed her. He had rehearsed it. She felt the heat rise to her cheeks, but it wasn't embarrassment. It was the sting of betrayal dressed in silk. 15 years. 15 years of red-eye flights, of broken anniversaries, of learning how to say trust in 6 different languages. And it all unraveled in front of 12 of the most powerful people on earth. But the worst part, it wasn't the words. It was how confident he looked saying them. As if this was his show now. As if her story had already been erased and all that remained was his press-ready performance. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Maris Halloway just stood there, frozen, not from shock, but from clarity. Because in that moment, in front of 12 CEOs, 2 interpreters, 3 assistants, and a man with a camera waiting outside, she realized the truth. She hadn't lost a job. She had been betrayed, and not quietly, not in a closed-door conversation or a polite restructuring memo, but in full view. In the room she built, in the deal she crafted, in the silence she had mastered now being weaponized against her. This wasn't corporate strategy. It was a coup, and the blade hadn't come from the front. It came from behind, and it came smiling. For a split second, she wondered what the CEOs were thinking. Would they pity her, judge her, forget her? But then her eyes caught something. Mr. Takahashi, CEO of the Tokyo firm, gave her the slightest nod. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. He knew, and that was all she needed to hold herself upright. Not out of pride, but because Maris wasn't going to give Damien the performance he wanted. She would not cry, she would not run, she would not hand him her dignity neatly folded on the table like a napkin. Instead, she inhaled, slow, controlled, and let the moment stretch. Let him squirm in the silence he didn't understand. Because he could own the chair, but he would never own the room. 15 years. 15 years of midnight flights, missed birthdays, quiet sacrifices gone. Just like that. Maris looked at Damien. Not the man standing in her place, but the man who once stood beside her in strategy meetings. The man who used to call her irreplaceable when they closed that impossible Mexico City deal at 3 a.m. The man who, when nervous in early briefings, leaned on her calm like it was solid ground. And now he wouldn't even meet her eyes. His stare was surgical, impersonal, like she was just another old system being replaced by a newer, flashier model. And worse, he didn't look guilty. He looked satisfied. That look hit harder than the announcement, because it confirmed the truth. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was a slow betrayal planned piece by piece behind closed doors. And what hurt the most, it wasn't that he didn't believe in her. It was that he had once pretended he did. Every ounce of trust, every weekend she gave up, every time she cleaned up his mess, none of it mattered. He had never seen her as a partner, only a stepping stone. She wasn't watching her job collapse. She was watching the illusion of loyalty crumble into dust. And in that moment, the room she built became the stage for her erasure. Before there was the Windsor suite, before billion-dollar contracts and nods from global CEOs, there was a cramped studio apartment with paper-thin walls and a 24-year-old woman falling asleep with flashcards stuck to her face. Maris didn't start with connections. She started with a passport full of blank pages and a hunger so quiet it didn't roar, it burned. Her nights weren't for sleep. They were for language drills, Mandarin tones that bruised her tongue, German articles that never quite made sense, Japanese honorifics she repeated until her voice cracked. She didn't just study languages. She studied cultures, customs, silences. The way a pause in Tokyo meant something different than a pause in Munich. The way yes in a boardroom didn't always mean yes. While her classmates were chasing promotions, Maris was chasing precision. She would take morning conference calls with Singapore at 4 a.m., her laptop balanced on a stack of laundry, a lukewarm coffee in one hand, and Google Translate open just in case. And when she made her first mistake, a translation error that nearly killed a deal in Milan, she didn't cry. She stayed up for 36 hours straight and rewrote the entire negotiation framework in Italian. Maris didn't rise because someone lifted her. She rose because she built the stairs. Zurich. The room was freezing. Not because of the weather, but because the Swiss legal team had made it clear one wrong clause and the entire merger collapses. Maris sat at the table for 23 hours straight. Her spine ached. Her lips were chapped. She hadn't eaten in 14 hours, only sipped sparkling water to stay alert. The CEO on the other end refused to sign until a liability term was reworded in exact legal Swiss German. No interpreter could get it right. So Maris did it herself, from memory, at 3:14 a.m. When the CEO finally signed, he didn't look up. But Maris did. She didn't smile. She just exhaled, quietly, as if releasing the weight of an entire corporation from her back. Shanghai, 3 days of negotiation, 14 revisions. 2 translators had already quit from exhaustion. The deal was worth 320 million baht, but the cultural misunderstanding around one phrase in the supply chain clause almost tanked it. Maris caught it in the final hour after 19 hours of back-to-back sessions. She rewrote the sentence in Mandarin herself with such nuance, the Chinese CEO paused, then nodded, and said, "Only someone who understands us could write it that way." Berlin. Rain hit the windows like Morse code. The German engineering consortium was notorious for precision, and Maris was operating on 3 hours of sleep and a stomach full of anxiety. Their legal team asked a question about cross-jurisdictional risk transfer. It had taken her 4 weeks to prepare that clause. She answered in German, flawlessly, with references. They fell silent. Then the CEO leaned in and said, "If you had been born here, would have made you our lead negotiator." These weren't wins in the newsletter. There were no press releases, no medals. But Maris remembered every minute, every skipped meal. Every night her body begged for sleep, but her mind refused. She wasn't chasing glory, she was chasing mastery, and it came at a cost. Her marriage ended on a Tuesday. There was no screaming, no betrayal, just a quiet dinner, 2 half-finished glasses of wine, and a husband who finally said, "You don't live here anymore. You just land here between flights." Maris didn't argue. She just stared at the pasta going cold on her plate. She couldn't even remember the last time she cooked in that kitchen, or the last time she slept 8 hours in her own bed. At first she thought she could hold both the career and the life, but somewhere between Shanghai and Berlin, she stopped calling home, and eventually no one called her either. Her parents celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary without her. She was in Zurich smoothing out a clause about international tax compliance. The video her sister sent showed their father blowing out candles alone. A chair left empty, a pause in the music that no one dared mention. She watched the clip in her hotel room with the curtains closed and a translator knocking on the door for the next round of negotiations. This wasn't sacrifice. This was erosion. She didn't give it all up at once. She gave it away in hours in silence, in unread messages. Her life hadn't been stolen. She had traded it for credibility, for control, for a seat at tables where no one ever asked if she was okay. And now that seat had been pulled out from under her. Maris believed in loyalty. Not the kind printed in mission statements, the kind you live through red-eye flights, missed birthdays, and staying until the lights go out. She believed the company saw her. Not just her results, but her late-night saves, her cultural insight, her quiet fixes that made headlines possible. She wasn't just an employee. She was the bridge between time zones, between languages, between chaos and calm, and in return she asked for nothing flashy. Just a little dignity, a little fairness. So when Damian Cross joined as CEO, she gave him the benefit of the doubt. Despite the flashy entrance, despite the PR-ready charm, despite the way he spoke over her in meetings, but quoted her work in interviews. At first it was small things. He'd reframe her reports in board decks without asking. He'd present her strategies as team contributions, never naming the team. He once told her she had a legacy presence like she was a framed photo in the hallway. Then came the whispers. We need fresh energy, younger branding, a forward-facing face. She'd heard those phrases before, but never directed at her. Until one day, Damian looked across the executive lounge and said, "You've done incredible work, Maris, but we're entering a new era." That was when it clicked. He wasn't building with her. He was preparing to erase her. Damian Cross walked into the company like a luxury ad campaign. Tailored suits, magazine hair, quotes pulled from TED Talks he barely understood. People noticed him. How could they not? He was tall, charming in that over-rehearsed kind of way. He shook hands like he was running for office. He asked questions like a game show host, then answered them himself before anyone could speak. He looked like a leader. He played the role perfectly. But when the cameras were off, when the real work began, Damian disappeared. He wasn't in the late-night briefings. He wasn't reading draft 10 of a partnership clause. He wasn't there at 4 a.m. when a cultural slip almost collapsed a 7-figure deal. Maris was, every time. But Damian, he waited for the applause, then walked on stage like it had always been his. And the worst part, people fell for it. They didn't see how empty his words were. They didn't notice that his strategy decks were just Maris memos, rebranded with buzzwords. He didn't earn his seat. He styled his way into it. It didn't happen overnight. It never does. The slow erasure of Maris Holloway began like a draft of cold air, barely noticeable at first, but enough to make her reach for her jacket. The first time it was a compliment. We're thinking of bringing in some younger energy to balance the board. Damian had said it casually, swirling his espresso like the words meant nothing. The second time it was a branding meeting. A rework of leadership photos. Suddenly Maris' headshot was missing from the mock-up. Oh, probably just an oversight, someone mumbled. But it wasn't. Then came the phrasing. Refreshing our leadership image. Highlighting agile contributors. Showcasing next-gen direction. Maris began to notice a shift in invitations. Meetings she once led, now just summaries in her inbox. Clients she built now being transitioned to someone closer to the brand's new direction. And when she asked Damian directly, he smiled. You've been the backbone for years. This is just evolution, not elimination. But she knew. Backbones don't get invited to the photo shoot. He didn't read it. Not paragraph 9, not clause 14, not the diplomatic contingency buried deep under mutual obligations. He signed it all with the confidence of a man who thought brand refresh was more important than legal precision. While Maris labored over every sentence, cross-checking jurisdictional language and translating nuances across 3 continents, Damian was more concerned with the shot list. He had a photographer booked, lighting tested in the Windsor Suite days in advance. The strategic hire, his golden replacement, had already been told when to enter, where to stand, what to wear. There was even an internal memo draft pre-written, a bold new era of leadership energized by forward-facing vision. Today marks a milestone of transition and innovation, a tribute to legacy and a commitment to future excellence. No mention of Maris. just the illusion of a passing torch when in reality it was theft. Damien didn't understand the contracts. He didn't even pretend to. His world was visuals, impressions, performative leadership wrapped in jargon and newsletter quotes. But contracts don't care about charisma. And when you remove the wrong person, they collapse. And Maris Shi had written that collapse into the very clause he never read. The praise was always public, always polished, always planned. Maris is our compass. No one bridges global clients like she does. We owe this deal's success to her cultural fluency, and every time he said it, Damien would glance her way just long enough for people to clap, but not long enough to make it personal. It was never about credit. It was about positioning. Because behind every compliment was a shadow, a quiet note to HR, a private conversation about succession planning, a subtle realignment of reporting lines. Maris wasn't being appreciated. She was being prepared, not for promotion, but for replacement. She remembered the day he called her institutional knowledge. Everyone smiled. She didn't, because she knew what that phrase really meant. It meant you're part of the past. You're too rooted to be rebranded. You're valuable enough to keep around until we don't need you anymore. It wasn't praise. It was a countdown. And Damien, he was watching the clock, waiting for the perfect moment to make his move. 6 months ago, Maris couldn't sleep. She had sensed it, the shift in tone, the whispers in hallways, the sudden meetings without her. She knew something was coming, but she also knew she had time. And if she played this right, she'd only need one move. In the final draft of the global MOU, she added a clause. Not flashy, not bold, just one quiet line buried in legal complexity. In the event of a leadership transition impacting primary negotiators, all signatory obligations are subject to renegotiation, pending consent of all counterparties involved. Legal jargon, sure. But what it really meant was this. If I'm removed, this deal burns. She didn't even tell her team. She didn't tell legal. She didn't need to, because the clause was within her right to insert. And nobody ever reads past the executive summary, not even Damien, especially not Damien. 6 months later, in the same room, he publicly fired her. Those 12 CEOs were holding pens above signature lines, not knowing the moment he dismissed her, he voided every deal on the table. Maris didn't panic. She stood composed the same way she did when closing $300 deals at 3 a.m. across time zones. Damien had spoken loudly. She spoke in layers. To Mr. Takeda of Tokyo, she switched to soft, respectful Japanese, the language of nuance, of reputation. President Takeda. Do you recall the clause about leadership transitions? The room shifted. Takeda's brows pulled together. He pulled the document out of his briefcase, the one no one else had touched. To Frau Appler of Berlin, she changed gears, crisp, formal German precision. Volume paragraph 14, erwähnt jeder Wechsel bei den Hauptunterzeichnern erfordert neue Zustimmung. As stated in clause 14, any change in key signatories requires renewed consent. Kubler froze. Her assistant leaned in, whispering rapidly. Then to Mr. Sun from Shanghai, Maris gave the final push in smooth, elegant Mandarin. Mr. Sun, I trust your company doesn't want to sign an invalid contract. 3 languages, 3 cultures, 1 message, the deal was dead. Not with rage, not with revenge, just fluency. The silence in the room now wasn't confusion. It was realization. Damien Cross was all style, the tailored suit, the confident gait, the smirk that had already been photographed by 3 reporters outside. He had come to stage a leadership moment, not manage it, not understand it. Certainly not read the damn thing. The Windsor Suite wasn't a conference room to him. It was a runway, the boardroom table just a prop, the CEOs an audience. He thought, once I sign this, it'll be the face of a new era. So he had his PR team write his speech. He had the lighting adjusted. He had a photographer prepped for the historic signing shot. What he didn't have was a clue what he was signing. The contract in front of him wasn't just paper. It had been quietly rewritten by the woman he just tried to erase. And now she was watching him. Not with anger, with silence. Like a chess master who's already won, just waiting for him to realize it. Damien finally reached for the pen, but Takeda didn't nod. Kebler didn't move. Mr. Sun leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. The camera flash never came. The tension in the Windsor Suite had turned to ice. 12 CEOs, 1 table, 1 pen, and nothing moved. That's when Maris finally reached into her coat pocket. Not fast, not dramatic, just calm, like someone who had already won. She pulled out a small matte black USB. The room leaned in. This, she said softly, contains the required digital signature protocols for all 12 jurisdictions represented here today. Silence. Damien blinked. He looked at the lawyer beside him, then at the CTO who suddenly looked very small in his chair. "You didn't sign it already," Damien stammered. "No," Maris replied. "I couldn't." She turned to Takeda. "I speak for the Tokyo office, then to Katabler and for Berlin, and to Mr. Sun and for Shanghai. The clause is simple. If Maris Kate is removed from this deal, the cryptographic chain is broken. The contract becomes legally null in all 12 countries." And then she said the words no one in that room would forget. "You see, gentlemen, I wasn't part of the contract. I was the contract." Damien stood frozen, not because he was shocked, but because he finally understood. This wasn't just business. This was precision warfare. And Maris had come armed. Damien straightened his suit jacket. The Windsor suite was silent, but in his head a drum roll was playing. He sat at the head of the table, her seat, the place where Maris had orchestrated 1,000 negotiations. He barely warmed the cushion before leaning in smiling like a man who had just conquered the board. "Gentlemen," he began, voice smooth, "thank you for your confidence in this leadership transition." He spoke of new energy, of youthful vision, of modernizing the brand. He paused for polite chuckles, but no one laughed. They just looked at him. Across the table, Takeda didn't blink. Mr. Sun was typing on his phone. Kabler whispered something to his aide. Damien cleared his throat. Today marks the beginning of a bold new chapter. He was cut off. The CTO slid a tablet to him. One line flashed on screen. Signature authorization failed. He froze. "No problem," he said. "We'll get that sorted." Glitch. Maris hadn't said a word. She didn't have to. He tried again. Clicked. Denied. Tried again. Denied. Behind him, the lawyers began to whisper. Behind them, the investors started checking their watches. Damien glanced at the USB still resting on the table. He hadn't touched it. Not even once. Power, he realized, isn't about the chair you sit in. It's about the system built underneath it and who holds the key. And right now, he was just another guy in a suit trying to lead without a signature. The silence turned sharp, not tense surgical. The CEO of Oslo, Mr. Eric Madsen, leaned forward, his icy blue eyes slicing through the room. "Damien," he said plainly. "Clause 17. Damien blinked. I believe it pertains to post-signatory logistics." Incorrect. Madsen cut in voice calm but final. Clause 17 mandates continued multilingual compliance through the lead negotiator, Maris Hale. The room shifted. Damien chuckled nervously, glancing at Maris as if expecting her to interject. She didn't. Instead, Kubler, the German CEO, adjusted his cufflinks and spoke cold and clear. "If she's not part of the implementation who ensures the conditions are met." Damien opened his mouth, closed it. Eric Madsen placed his pen down. "We signed with her, not with your marketing campaign." A rustle moved down the table, chairs pushed back ever so slightly. Executives exchanging glances, whispered translations. Lawyers leaning into their clients' ears. The momentum shifted slowly but definitively away from the man in the center seat, toward the woman who hadn't moved, who hadn't spoken, but whose presence had just flipped the entire room. And suddenly Damien wasn't leading a boardroom. He was defending his right to be there. There were no raised voices, no slamming fists, just paper. One by one, the CEOs began to close their folders. The sound of crisp leather and quiet snaps echoed louder than any outburst. Interpreter devices clicked off. Earpieces came out. Translators without a word folded their laptops and stepped back from the table. Damien blinked. Wait, gentlemen, we're not done. But they were. The French General Counsel stood up. So did the Korean Chief Legal Advisor. Then the Berlin team. One after another, a chain reaction of silence and motion. Maris still hadn't said a single word. She didn't have to. Each closed file was louder than a slammed door. And then the Tokyo CEO turned to Damien and said, "We speak again when she speaks," and walked out. Damien's hand hovered midair, unsure whether to reach for his phone or just disappear. He had thought replacing Maris would be a statement of power. Now it looked more like a funeral for trust. There was a long silence, then movement. It wasn't Damien. It was CEO Munich. He stood up slowly, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked past Damien like he didn't exist. He extended a hand to Maris. "You are the deal. One sentence, not past tense, not were, are." Then he nodded respectfully and walked out. Behind him, like dominoes falling in reverse, CEO Zurich followed. Then Tokyo, then Oslo. Each one gave Maris a nod. Some shook her hand, some just followed. Damien didn't move. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He watched as 12 world leaders, billion-dollar signatories left the boardroom, not with him, but behind the woman he just fired. Maris finally turned her gaze toward Damien. Calm, not angry, not smug, just finished. I built this deal in 13 languages. You tried to erase me in one. She stepped away and never looked back. The moment the last CEO disappeared behind the mirrored doors, silence fell like a guillotine. Damien blinked. Then he snapped. Get legal on the line. Now someone record this, get cameras, witnesses, anything. Where's Clause 17 who approved this? His voice cracked, but it wasn't power. It was panic wrapped in a suit. He turned to the interpreter. She was already gone. The lawyer chair empty, the assistant quietly texting probably her exit plan. For a man obsessed with image, there was no one left to watch him fall. He stumbled toward the documents, flipping pages, frantically searching for a lifeline he never bothered to read. Clause 17 glared back at him like a loaded gun. Termination of key personnel nullifies agreement unless certified by authorized signatory. His hand trembled. There was only one authorized signatory, and she had just left. It took the legal team 4 minutes. 4 minutes to deliver the words that would obliterate 2 years of Damien's illusions. The general counsel, stern, gray-haired, unshakable, entered the boardroom with a document in one hand and a trembling verdict in the other. He didn't sit. He didn't soften the blow. Clause 17 is enforceable. Only Maris Calderon has the digital key to validate all 12 MOUs. Her removal nullifies the deal. It's legally dead. Dead. Just like that. Damien's face went blank. So you're saying... I'm saying the lawyer cut in coldly. You fired the only person who could close this deal. And you did it minutes before signature. The paper on the table was now worth less than the coffee in the room. 1.9 billion evaporated. And all the cameras in the world couldn't capture the slow, shameful sinking of a man who thought charisma could replace competence. Damien barely had time to blink. His assistant whispered, "You need to see this." It was an email from CEO Munich. CC all 11 global partners. Subject stability. He clicked it open, heart pounding. One sentence, that's all. We do not do business with instability. No greeting, no closing, just a bullet. Cold, measured, final. Within minutes, replies stacked underneath like tombstones agreed. CEO Tokyo, our board concurs. CEO Zurich, regretfully withdrawing. CEO Shanghai, will review next year, with different leadership. CEO Berlin, Damien's hands trembled. He had the suit, he had the title, he even had the spotlight. But what he didn't have was trust. And without trust, no signature, no partnership, no future. No cameras followed her. No headline screamed her name. No one clapped. But Maris walked out of the Windsor Suite lobby like the world had already shifted beneath her heels. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of the years she gave. Full of the voices she no longer needed to answer to. Full of the woman she had become through loss, betrayal, and finally resolve. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need to stay and watch Damien unravel. She had already won, not because the deal collapsed, not because the board turned, but because for the first time in 15 years she chose herself. No PR, no press release, just the echo of her heels, and in her bag the USB that started it all. She was barely 5 steps outside the building when her phone buzzed. Unknown caller, Japan. Maris-san, the voice said with perfect clarity and calm. We were impressed today. It was the CEO from Tokyo, the same man who once told her over dinner in Roppongi that loyalty is the foundation of legacy. Today she proved it. I want you, he said, as my private advisor. Independent, not tied to any corporate chain. You'll report to no one but me. Maris didn't say a word. He continued. Name your rate, we'll double it. Silence. We'll send a jet if you need time to think. Maris smiled for the first time in months. Not because of the money, not because of the prestige, but because the right people saw her worth when it mattered most. The world that once turned its back had just made its first bow. Her phone buzzed again. Message. CEO Munich HQ. Our board reviewed everything. Well signed. On one condition, Maris must lead the delegation. No pleasantries, no emojis. Just power typed in 3 simple lines. This was no longer about corporate roles or internal politics. It was about trust. It was about who had earned the right to sit at the table not because of title, but because of integrity. She had once flown across 3 time zones to salvage that company's deal in Seoul. She had once rewritten 27 pages of their contract overnight to avoid a billion-dollar penalty. Now they remembered, and now they demanded. For the first time in her career, Maris wasn't the option. She was the standard. The chair was secondhand, the desk had a scratch down one side, the coffee machine made more noise than espresso. And yet Maris sat still, eyes closed for a moment. No nameplate on the door, no skyline view. But this was hers. For the first time in her life, she wasn't borrowing authority or surviving someone else's politics. There were no secrets in the walls, no whispered betrayals behind frosted glass. Everything in this room, every decision, every sound, every failure, every win, would be hers alone. Her laptop chimed. 3 more emails, all from CEOs, all asking the same thing. When can we meet? We want you. She smiled softly, not like a conqueror, but like someone who had finally come home. The contract was clean, simple, powerful. A single page, no hidden clauses, no fine print traps, just one line awaiting her name. Maris reached into her drawer. The pen was still there. That pen, gold-trimmed, weighted, once gifted to her by a CEO who said, "This is for your first deal on your own someday." He never got to see that day, but the pen did. She clicked it slowly, inhaled, signed. The ink bled perfectly onto the page. A signature not just of legal commitment, but of rebirth. She didn't smile. Not out of pride, but out of peace. Not one journalist snapped the moment. No one clapped, no drama, just silence. And the echo of power earned, not granted. Never shrink yourself to fit into a place that no longer sees your value. Maris gave the company 15 years her skills, her loyalty, her weekends, even her marriage. She believed they'd have her back. Instead, they blindsided her in the very room she helped build. But here's the twist. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She came prepared. And when the time came, she made every CEO in the room stand for her without raising her voice. What's the lesson? You don't need to fight for respect if you've built yourself into someone they can't afford to ignore. Don't let anyone define your worth, especially not the ones who were happy to use you until they didn't need you. Build quietly. Walk away loudly if this story hit a nerve. If you've ever been replaced, overlooked, or told you weren't enough, like this video to remind yourself you are. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like Maris, because quiet people, they don't stay quiet forever. Drop a comment, "I am the Maris in my own story," so we know you're not just watching, you're rising.